All
Maybe.
right. So we just are waiting on Tara.
You did. Hold on.
Where is the?
My sister's driving.
Man, it's still, huh?
You go into the settings to try to see if it might have switched off your camera.
Let me see if, yeah. You all don't need to see me anyway, but let's see. Would be nice to at least be on the camera when I do the introduction. Uh, hmm, settings. HP widescreen camera unavailable.
Does anybody see Tara?
No, I
Doesn't look,
don't see her.
doesn't look like she's joined yet. Yeah,
Gotcha.
camera.
Yeah.
It was giving me issues. I'm not sure why.
You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're all set. All right, you all have the run of show. All is well. Good luck.
Thank you. For sure.
We do have people starting to enter the room.
Can you all see me yet?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. They're like, oh man, it's an old guy.
I was actually just really admiring your set design. I know it's your
Yep,
Oh,
probably your
we're all
actual
set.
house, but I was like, wow.
Wait, Dr. Jackson, you're on mute.
no, I can hear her.
Yeah,
I
you
thought
can't
it
hear
was a
me.
set design too. It looks lovely. It looks
I was like, it
lovely
looks.
back
I'm like, I
there.
got my little pan. I'm trying it, but
Thank you, Tara. Thank
It
you. No,
looks
this is the
lovely.
dining room.
lovely. My sister told me that I need to get a bookshelf. She's like, because she said you don't look smart
You
enough.
look more
when you're-
studious. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
you
look more
should get.
studious.
I was like, well, the bookshelf is what does it.
I need glasses with like, you know, fake lenses or something, so I can look more studious.
You know what? That's funny that you say that. If you go in my Amazon cart right now, there's some blue light. Get the blue light glasses because then they have a purpose. You don't have to be wearing like,
Thanks, thank you, Brandy.
instead of
That
just
makes me feel
spraying.
better.
And I'm telling you, because I actually wear glasses, but I wear contacts.
Okay, great.
All right, I'm gonna just grab a quick beverage. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and you all don't need me here. I'm going to be off camera, but I am here to support you all anyway, shape, fashion, or form.
All right. Thanks so much, Rashad.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Yeah. Welcome to our Okay. I'm glad we got paired up, Tara.
Good.
Always a
I
good time.
know.
Because last time we were together, wasn't it it was like a women's event. We were doing the panel. You probably have done so many events. You probably don't even like.
It was like a woman's health, like mental health or something like that.
Yeah.
Another event, but yeah, I've done so many
I was.
events. This week alone, I just did a presentation about the volunteer program yesterday. So yes, I'm always presenting now. It sounds like.
Well, you're good at it. That's why you keep getting
Thank you.
asked to do it.
Hey, Christopher. David needs some help in the health career session. I'm gonna hop over there real quick. I spoke to Tara and Dr. Jackson already. They're good to go. Added Tara. You don't have any videos or presentations. I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna monitor the questions in the chat, or
Okay.
you can do that. But we need to, between Christopher and I, we need to be able to monitor the questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna hop over real quick, help out David in health careers, and I'll be.
Thank you, Eric. I think we're good.
Okay.
This is gonna be great.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Oh my goodness, HD. Okay. Oh, thank God. I upgraded my camera input a little bit.
Everybody looks good. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right.
Coffee? Are you a coffee or a tea drinker?
Yep, this is coffee. I drink tea, but we got on early and I didn't get to my coffee. So
What I say, and I had coffee earlier, and I treat coffee like diesel fuel.
oh,
In the morning, I have to have it.
have to.
And then you can like go to. I always wanted to become one of these people who starts their day with tea because without coffee, I don't know. It just seems like they have it more together because they don't need the jet fuel to wake up. But I have not yet become that person.
I'm usually I have to. I think it's more of like a habit to be honest. In the morning, it's more like tradition now. Like if I don't do it, it's like something is not right for today. It's like so. I think like that is more of tradition. I think more than need for me to be honest. I think to be honest,
Just out of habit. For me,
Yeah.
I know if that step doesn't happen, if the coffee step doesn't happen, I'm not good the rest of the day.
you know, the closer I get to 40, you know, if I get off my routine, you know, you get to something is wrong for the day.
You know. Amen.
Yeah, it's like just the routine, you know, we just get in our ways and
Yeah.
like that.
Yep.
I'm actually interested in making my own teas pretty soon here.
Oh,
So
that'll be nice. Yeah.
I just have this love of, well, a love, but not yet a talent yet. But I
Okay.
want to be able to grow my own like chamomile tree or plant and then like dry it. And then it's just something to do. I like plants.
Yeah.
So just
That would be nice.
would be nice. Then Maybe I'll have my little Etsy store, my little teas. I can't help but think that way. I'm just like, how could I
That's right.
get it? Like I have all this time to be opening a tea shop with Etsy.
Well, it looks like folks are coming in, so we can at least start the conversation. For some reason, we're finding that these 45-minute sessions are over just like that. So,
Okay. So, yeah.
because you get into the conversation and it's time to go to the expo booth or move on to the next session. So we'll go ahead and get things flowing. I'll just start with a couple of things. And so welcome, everybody. This is the session covering anti-racism in medicine with our own Dr. Brandy Jackson from Howard Brown. I'll be your moderator for a portion of today's time, but she's got very capable folks that are supporting her through this brief time that we have together. Again, I'm Dr. Christopher Holliday. I'm a 100 Black Men of Chicago member and a co-chair for today's event. We are excited today to share the expertise of a leading physician on the front lines of the conversation about race and racism in medicine. A few quick housekeeping notes. We will hold all Q&A until the end, but feel free to put any comments, questions, thoughts in the chat, and I will monitor that and help to bring that to the front. And we'll absolutely encourage people to share and join the conversation. Come on screen and ask questions as well. We want this to be as interactive and as fun as possible. At the end of this session, we will take another 15-minute break and we'll invite people to go to the vendor booths and to see our sponsors and vendors for today's expo. Terry, would you like to introduce Dr. Jackson?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Tara Campbell. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the Strategic Partnership Specialist at Howard Brown Health, and I help to manage and establish partnerships for our organization. Today, we have Dr. Brandy Jackson, who is one of our wonderful members of our executive leadership team and also our Chief Behavioral Health Officer. And we are here today to talk about bias in healthcare. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Brandy Jackson.
Hi, everyone. As Tara said, I'm Dr. Brandy Jackson. You can call me Dr. Brandy. That's what my patients usually call me. And I'm so happy to be here to really just share any kind of knowledge, insight, and wisdom that I can that will help you all and help forward the conversation when it comes to bias in medicine and all that stuff. So thanks so much for being here and thanks for having me.
So today, pretty much we're going to talk about racial, gender, and sexual orientation bias. And pretty much, Dr. Jackson, what do you think is a tangible solution to address the biases that are in healthcare?
You know what? I obviously spent a great deal of time thinking about this when I'm not working at Howard Brown as sort of a healthcare administrator. And just for folks who maybe aren't familiar with what a chief behavioral health officer does, I am a psychiatrist, so I'm a medical doctor who specializes in mental health. And then I lead a team of other psychiatrists and therapists and also social workers, folks who really take care of the minds and hearts of folks who come in. For me, I think that anytime we're talking about making a change to the world, we, as many great minds have said before, have to begin with ourselves. So for me, the topic of mitigating bias or getting rid of bias in healthcare can really feel like a huge, almost impossible task. Like, where do we even begin? So maybe it's because I'm a psychiatrist and I spend so much time with people in a one-on-one session. I truly believe that if each one of us can start to shift our perspective and recognize our own biases as we approach the work. In other words, worry about ourselves and our house. Slowly but surely, medicine will start to change. And by we, I mean those of us who work in the healthcare field, especially those who have leadership positions in healthcare.
Thank you for that. I think that definitely as being an individual that works in a supportive role in healthcare, but speaking from a client standpoint, I have dealt with, so many of the biases in healthcare, like, for example, having issues with getting access to opiates when I needed them, giving ibuprofen instead of providing, something stronger, because sometimes the provider may think, oh, you're tough, you can handle, what you're dealing with. So even with situations like that, how do you make people feel affirmed and making informed decisions around their healthcare, knowing that, there are those kind of biases that exist in healthcare for people?
I think if you're coming from the perspective of a patient, because I've been come from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Come from the perspective of the patient, it's so important to be your own advocate. And I know that it's easy to say,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot harder to do when you're in a room that is unfamiliar. Medical offices often make you feel like you don't belong from the moment you walk in. It feels very sterile or like not homey. And so trying to find your voice in those rooms can be really difficult. And then sometimes, and oftentimes, unfortunately, the doctor or the provider at the other side may not really make you feel welcome. I hate to say that, but it is a reality. So shop around. When it comes to your team of healthcare providers, you should like every one of them. You should feel comfortable with every one of them. And, it is a privilege to say, try to pick a different one if you don't like the one you have or you just don't vibe. And honestly, you don't need a reason. If it just doesn't feel right for whatever reason, I always urge people to shop around if you can, if you have that privilege.
Well, thank you for that. And I know that, we always say, talk about racial bias, but, it's actually, in actuality, is such a broad term, and it covers so many forms of discrimination within so many systems. But could you give us a definition of what is racial bias and how does it manifest itself in healthcare specifically?
To me, bias, and there's so many ways you could define it, but for me, anytime that a person is treated without love and care for any reason, there is some sort of bias going on. There's some sort of, because at the core, bias is about not seeing that other person as a full and free and worthy fellow human being. There is something that is blocking you from treating them that way. So removing bias is about figuring out all those blocks to seeing and being treated like a human and figuring out what they are in our society and getting rid of them.
Well, thank you for that. And I know another thing, like in the in the BIPOC and Black people of color community, there's such a heavy stigma with men of color going to the doctor. I know even with my father, having to endure things like, on dialysis, and having, and it's not an issue with having access because, there are things like Medicare, there are things on that level. So men have such a hard time going to the doctor. What stigmas exist with BIPOC men in healthcare, and why is this a healthcare crisis? Many people may not realize, but it is racial bias is a healthcare crisis because it reduces our access, to care. It reduces, when someone doesn't see value in you, they're not going to give you that same high level of care, that they would give someone else. So what stigmas exist with BIPOC men in healthcare? And can you let us know that why is this a healthcare crisis that we need to pay attention to?
I could fill many hours waxing poetic. So let me just let me just see what comes through as the most key. I love Black men. I feel, in this country, what they have endured from, many people think about slavery and chattel slavery and have these images of roots, which is all real and all true and all horrific. That didn't just go away. People didn't just all of a sudden start valuing Black men when we became free the same way they didn't start valuing Black women when we became free. So that idea of the simultaneous superhuman strength of Black men, which was exploited and continues to be, which I agree with that they have. And then also this kind of playing Black men like they are worthless at the same time by society. So you take a person like that and you put them into a healthcare system. Really, you put them in any system, and all those biases are still there. Just because somebody has a white coat on or has a stethoscope, they still were indoctrinated in a system, and usually it's an American system. So that being said, Black men, the Black men I love, like my fathers, my uncles and cousins, I see that they integrate within themselves that same negative view that society has. It's really hard when you don't feel like you're worth anything to say, I'm going to take care of myself at the core of it. And then you add on the layers, frankly, of, culture, in our culture, in the Black culture, there's homophobia in the culture. There's, I talk to Black men, as a doctor who I say, go get your colonoscopy. And they're like, I don't want anyone near my butt. I'm like, what the? So you're going to die?
Yeah.
Huh? You're going to die for homophobia? You're going to die for, all this. So I think there's layers and layers of things within our system, within our culture as Black people that we have to look at. But we're also in a wider system that tells Black men that they are not important, that they are weak, but also that they should keep going no matter what they're doing. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to pour into the Black men so that they feel worthy of taking care of themselves? Because I know for us, it's a lot of really their partners doing. So I have honestly more Black women coming through and saying, I can't get my dad to quit smoking. I can't get my boyfriend. And so I think that within the Black community, we figured out ways to take care of Black men, but I also want to root for Black men to take care of Black men. And it's not, I think that's why organizations like this are so important.
So you believe that having, I'm one that believes in, having people that look like the people you're serving. I believe that makes people of color, BIPOC people feel more comfortable coming to the doctor. So we talked about, that racial bias in healthcare, racial bias is a healthcare crisis, and we've isolated, some of the stigmas that BIPOC men deal with in healthcare. But we can't forget about Black women. Black women have also been one of the hugest victims, of bias in the healthcare system. So what are some issues that Black women face specifically, and how can we address this crisis?
Another thing that could take, fill up 5 hours to any of Black women, to the Black women out in the audience, I'll just say this. I'm a scientist at my core, so that's what doctors are. We're trained. This is not even a matter of my opinion as a Black woman, although I think that is the most valuable thing, is lived experience of the people who have lived it. But what I can say as a scientist, as a doctor, as a public health person with interest in public health, is that when you look at gender bias, then you layer that on top of racial bias. Literally the data tracks. So bad outcomes for Black people, worse outcomes for Black women people, versus even worse outcomes in terms of health for Black trans women. So when I can add identities and just watch the health of that population go down, that is systematic bias. It can be demonstrated. And then I think, so you just got bias on top of bias that hits Black women. But the other part of it is sort of like the spiritual or the emotional hit that you take as a Black woman in America. I have a twin sister. She's also a doctor and a Black woman. And we often say that Black women are the least protected of all women in this, certainly in this country. And that's not to say it's some sort of oppression Olympics, who's got it worse. But the fact is, when I cry, no one comes running to protect me, and I can cry publicly. And it's like, well, why is she being weak? Why is it? And then I look at women who are not Black women, and it's sort of like people rush to protect. I remember, it's still novel to me to hear from my white women friends, like, I shouldn't feel uncomfortable. I'm like, well, no, discomfort is a part of life. Who is it that feels that they need to make their life comfortable? So that must be like an amazing thing to expect safety in this world. It's not something I've ever had, and it's not something I ever expect to have unless I bring it to me. You know what I mean? So I think as a mental health provider, I think Black women are in a really unique position, both to feel great pain, but because of it, I think we've developed a kind of resistance and resilience that other folks probably don't quite understand, but we have it.
And for providers, this is just a follow up that I have because it's an issue that I experience, in myself, on navigating healthcare, as a black woman of trans experience, I endure, a different set of issues, with navigating healthcare. So do you have like a tip maybe for providers that may, this isn't something we talked about, but this is something probably to mention. Do you have any tips for providers that may have these biases, that are aware that they have these biases, but are looking to break those down so they can provide a higher level of care? So if you had to give them like one tip that they could do, to try to break down those barriers that affect, BIPOC men and women from accessing healthcare, from feeling safe, in their spaces, from trusting them, to navigate their bodies, in ways that bring them shame. What are some tips that you would give a provider?
First of all, I would say, okay, this is it's one tip, but I would make it like two part. Part one is be proud of yourself if you have done the hard task of looking at yourself and admitting to yourself that you do have biases. I have biases. All of us, we don't get out of this culture without some sort of biases. So kind of saying I am part of that is actually something to applaud yourself for, because many people go through their whole life and cannot say out of their mouth, I have biases. So that's part one. Part two is, I'll give an analogy. Let's just say that there was a person drowning in a lake right in front of you. Asking us, what should I do to help you? Asking that person, how should I help you? Isn't saying. They're going to say, just do something. You could find a life jacket. You could find, this is if they were, except they can't tell you this because they're drowning, but if they could, they would say, get a raft, throw a rope, drain the lake, create a wind turbine funnel that brings air to me, get scuba gear. So my answer is do something. And that's really, I mean that it's a little harsh, but the fact is, anytime you're kind of in your head saying, well, I don't know what to do now, I'm so biased, it's so overwhelming, that's time that's wasted. Because literally any action you take is superior to inaction and guilt in inaction. Guilt actually is just a negative emotion that tells me that you need to do some self-forgiveness and some self-compassion and move on, because your guilt actually isn't for the drowning person. Your guilt is for you to kind of pontificate about, oh my gosh, it's actually about you, because the guilt doesn't help people. So release that and then do literally anything that you think would help. And if you're coming from a place of love, if your intention is love, it will help, whatever it is that you choose.
Well, thank you for that. And Yvette Miller actually brought up our next segment that we're talking about. So that we will be talking. Yvette said the LGBTQI plus community commonly experiences bias on a broader level than many other marginalized and underdeserved communities, and that's definitely right. Because of bias is why that specific demographic endures endures on a greater level. So as Yvette mentioned, gender and sexual orientation bias in healthcare, poses so many challenges. As healthcare evolves, people are evolving, people are feeling freer, they're becoming more aware of themselves, Now more than ever, it's important to respect how people identify. What are some areas of opportunity for healthcare providers to be more mindful about and gender identity, and to educate themselves about gender identity and orientation and the difference, in that spectrum?
I love this question, and what I can say is I hear a lot of really, really well-meaning, loving people saying, I'm so confused. Now it's another thing to learn. I don't know, just that overwhelm and almost like you kind of just like get paralyzed by it, because they're like, I don't even know what offended anyone and I won't say anything. And I think you can get stuck in that headspace, but then I say it's about go back to what is your intention. Your intention is to send out love and acceptance to your fellow human beings. Hopefully that's where you're coming from. The how of it, you will mess up. Now, to just like release from your head that there's some perfect way, because people are constantly renaming themselves and redefining themselves, even before, as you know, the word queer was used against a community and then now repurposed by many as an empowering word. So that it's going to change. That's the only sure thing. My big piece of advice is to let every person that you meet tell you who and what and how they choose to define themselves as on every level, and be careful not to assume. Whatever they give you, meet with love and acceptance, because it really, I'm amazed by our society's ability to come up with new ways to divide one another, to other someone else, when it's really not. It's because as soon as we wrap our head around, I use she, her, people's pronouns, it'll be another thing. Well, who do they have parties? So they'll come up with something else to discriminate against, like meaning the wider culture. So my approach, and it's worked very well, is to just say, who are you? And be quiet and listen and respect and love whatever comes out of their mouth, because it's theirs to define.
Thank you for that. And Christopher said that's excellent advice.
Dave, I try, Christopher, I'm trying out here. Okay.
And I know that's definitely I've always been, an advocate for trying to manage up to providers, when I being a Black trans woman, before there was an awareness in the industry for providers. I was always trying to manage up to providers to tell them, I don't have, a reproductive system, so stop asking me, do I have a period? And I think those are practices. Yeah, I think those are practices, that some providers probably not even sharing, like small things like that, be aware that everyone doesn't have reproductive, organs, or even cis women, may not have a period because something biological. So it's just things like that, like being more respectful, and how does all of that relate to trauma-informed care? I know that that's one of our transitional frameworks at Howard Brown. So how does that relate to trauma-informed care?
I'm really proud of how our clinic system, Howard Brown Health, how we're really making this really bold shift towards becoming trauma-informed. It's easy to say that, and it's like, well, what does that mean? To me, at its core, it's about always, trying your best to always hold in your mind that anyone in front of you, any human being in front of you, could have a history of, sexual harm, physical harm, emotional harm. And the definition of trauma is different for every person. So, just to have a respect for the diverse experiences of everyone in front of you. And that means watching your language, because although certain words or certain approaches may feel fine to you, to people who have a certain history, it can take them back to that place of power. So it all circles around to that point about respecting every soul in front of you. And to me, it starts the moment you walk through the doors. It actually starts before you walk through the doors. Are there signs out front for us in our work? Is there a rainbow flag to show this is a safe place? Do you actually declare it, or do you try to hide it as an organization? Do you try to hide that you are here for everyone? So I love when I go somewhere and it literally says queer friendly. Okay, so you don't have to guess where we stand. It also will repel people for whom that is not what they resonate with. So it's actually great. Declare it. So being trauma informed, I think, it's about being bold enough to call out bias and show yourself as sort of anti-bias, just physically, but also when people walk in, know enough about their history. I mean, you don't have to know the individual history, but just there's some low-hanging fruit here. In our community, it's dead naming. So are you literally, what if that's like high level? And for folks who don't know, for people who choose to change it to a different name, use a different name, the name they had when they were their former identity feels very triggering for many people because they're not that life. That's not who they are. And so it becomes an act of violence to call them a name that they have said, this is not my name. So at the organizational level, I think it's important for the organization to be savvy enough to have plans for these things. And then at the individual level, the staff member, the doctor, the nurse, the medical assistant should know the basics of extending respect in the way they speak and in the way they approach all people. That was a long-winded answer.
And thank you for that, because I think that you talked earlier about like that optical allyship where people will put a trans flag at their clinic, but then their staff are not trained on pronouns, or
so that's fake.
Training or so it's
fake.
like it's one thing to have optical allyship. It's one thing to say I treat everybody no matter how they identify, but what are some intentional things that we can do to make safe spaces for people in every spectrum? Not a flag, not a pride flag, not a button, but what are some intentional things that a provider, that a clinic can do to make everyone on the gender spectrum feel safe. Like you said, there may be a woman who's been raped, so she doesn't want to see certain imagery in your clinic. So just what are some tips or things that we can do to make safe spaces, not even in a clinic, just in a general business? What could they do to make that spaces safe for everyone on the gender spectrum?
And I think I just want to highlight what you said, Tara, about, and what was the word? Because I loved it. Was it visual allyship? The word you did use.
Optical allyship is when they'll have a flag.
Ooh.
But they're calling me he when I walk in,
That's high. Yeah, that's big. That's big. As Tara said, go beyond optical allyship, and you can take this as an individual level. I think it is very in vogue right now on social media, all over. We see celebrities who may either, I don't know, just sort of talk of the community, but then you look behind the scenes like, okay, well, what are you doing to support the community quietly? Because when it's optical, that's great. I think it's important to say and show exactly where you stand. But if it doesn't also happen internally, if it doesn't match up, I think the most practical tip that I could give folks who, and by the way, if you're in this room, probably you're not one of the ones who is like just so far off the rails. If you're here, you're actively learning, you want to be here. So much of my advice to folks who would be in a session like this is around trusting your own intuition, that you're here and you're trusting that if your intention is good, it will be felt by whomever. And if you are not well received, so let's say you make a snafu, let's say you offend someone. Maybe you don't identify as someone of trans experience and you're talking to someone of trans experience and they say, what did you just, or they're offended. Check yourself before you get upset by that. Because frankly, it's about decentering yourself constantly showing humility. So when you make a mistake and someone calls you out on it and says, even if they call you out on it in a way that maybe you don't like, maybe you feel like they should have been nice because you had good intentions, but at the end of the day, it's about taking that L and saying, even though my intention was good, it was not received that way. I may have triggered something. I clearly did trigger something in them. And this is all, by the way, in your head. You don't need to take up space saying this. I apologize. And then you listen. And that's really, I truly, but genuinely apologize. And if you do it, I've been there and I've not seen it not be received when my apology is in earnest, when I mess up.
That's definitely true, because I've had people, really almost run me out of their office, but I can tell, when when the response, when someone's intentional about it and they apologize, but don't harp on it, don't pester me about it, that's when I know that it was they made a mistake, and they're being an intentional trying to be aware, to correct it. So I respect that more than you just ignoring the situation, to apologize, address it, and move on.
What do you think it is? Am I allowed to ask you a question, Tara?
Sure. I mean, I think so. If they're okay with that.
I think we were making such an important point here, because I know so many people kind of get caught up in when I went to orientation at Howard Brown, and I've been with the organization for about 1.5 years. When I went to orientation, day one, they said that if you make a mistake, like let's say you either don't ask for pronouns or use the wrong ones, don't go, oh my gosh, Tara, I can't believe I used, Tara, I'm so, be in the meeting. Tara, call me, can you, because actually very quickly it becomes not about Tara or Brandy, it becomes you needing all of us to see that you feel bad, and you're just showing us that you're such an ally that you feel bad, when I feel like the point you just made, Tara, is like, take that and let it go. And that's actually showing more respect. Is that accurate for what you're saying? Because I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, because it's difficult, like you said, if people don't understand, like that's also that cultural competence is a form of customer service. If I am in the demographic that you're serving, if I'm the demographic that you're serving, then you need to constantly, be advanced on the tools to serve the people that that are coming to see you, that are, the individual that may be taking a bus down 79th, that had to go through all kind of stuff just to get to the doctor. You should be making sure that the experience is seamless, that you are taking 10 minutes before their appointment to review their chart, so you don't have to hit areas that may trigger them, so that is a practice I think that providers can do. Make sure that you schedule 10 minutes before your provider's appointments if you can, so they have time to review, charts of that client, so they don't do trauma triggers throughout their whole appointment, so that is just one way that I always tell my doctor, look at my chart. Don't come in here asking me stuff that you have access to.
Okay, Terry.
All right. So we'll go to the last segment.
I called you on my phone.
Sorry, Christopher.
I know. I had to write you down on my phone. Competence is a form of customer service. Sarah Campbell.
Don't run me off, because my billable charges is how you drive that BMW, doctor.
Okay, so you somebody. Where did you get that money from? You know what? You didn't tell us.
So I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'll go into that. So
I love it.
Throughout all of that, and I know the work that the leadership does and the staff, does to dismantle the current system of bias in healthcare. And we talked about a lot of those things, by being intentional, by talking, by using that person's pronouns, even when they're not around. There are many things that you can do to dismantle a lot of the biases to make it general conversation. What are some things how are you currently working to dismantle the current systems of biases in healthcare, and what could others do to affect that same change?
Oh my gosh, what a humbling question to be asked at, what I consider very early in my career, at least in terms of what I want to do in this space. So some folks may know that I have a twin sister named Dr. Brittany Jackson. Oh, sorry, Dr. Brittany James. She's married. I admit that we're not full twinsies that way. But she and I, and we have a fellow co-founder named Dr. Jessica Richardson. We are 3 Black women physicians who started a organization called the Institute for Anti-Racism in Medicine. And really, we speak, we advocate, we work with policy to try to, we speak to healthcare providers. So that's why I was living for what you said, Tara, because that's the kind of stuff we just turn around and say to our colleagues. And we know we live in a world where when it comes from a doctor to a doctor, it's received differently, even though your words are the words of so many people who come in for the care itself. Really, y'all have already said it, but for some reason, when we say it to fellow doctors, it seems that they are willing to hear it more. So we choose to use our privilege that way. And we're working on some education platforms that's coming out in the spring where people can learn really the principles, how to fight racism, like turn you into a freedom fighter with us. We'll give you all the tools. So working on that is the main thing that we're doing right now. And I'm really excited. that, and I'm working on a YouTube project. My twin sister and I, it's going to be called Healing in Progress, and we're going to be taking you behind the scenes of our lives as healers, and also just give out this knowledge in our heads from medical school and from our lives as doctors, and just really hopefully convince folks that the only place you need to go to begin healing is within, and everything you have is within.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that, I think you said one of the biggest things that you could do to dismantle bias is by telling the information that is in your head, by doing things like this, by, making time to speak about, putting together a PowerPoint about those tools that and recording it and disseminating it, on your platforms, so people doesn't know there are things that small. So just sharing the information in your head is something providers that are aware of, like you're doing today, I believe, is something that we can help do to dismantle those current systems of bias in healthcare. So
yes.
I think we have some questions that were in the chat today. And also I had one last question for you too before we get to the questions. What should someone do if they experience bias? Now that is very important. We talked about a lot, and I just want to make sure we cover this. I'm sorry. We talked a lot about providers, but what should a patient do? A client? I prefer to say client because patient sounds so medicinal, and I like client. It's a business transaction. I like client. What should a client do if someone if they're experiencing bias with their healthcare provider? What should the first step they should take after that experience?
Call patient advocate, customer service. And you know what? I think this thing breaks down when clients realize they have the power, as you said, to make a choice with where they spend their dollars for healthcare, or have their insurance spend their dollars, or even if you're receiving care free of charge, the government spends its dollars. There's lots of places you can go for your care. And so I think voting with your feet first and foremost. If you're someone who feels better if you kind of turn your bad experience to action, absolutely find customer service. Absolutely, look on the website and see who's in charge and send them an email about your experience. Because I'm a chief and I sit up with other kind of senior leadership in healthcare organization, I can tell you, we read it. We do read those things. And when you get an account that comes through from a client and it's, bad, and it's saying that and name. And here's the thing about naming folks. I feel that as healthcare providers, whether I'm all the way up from anything from a doctor, nurse, midwife, all of us who join this profession, you should hold us to a standard that's much higher than everybody else. So by all means, if I myself do something in an office, maybe I didn't know, maybe I did it on purpose. Either way, that information needs to be something that I am confronted with. If I'm a good person, if I'm a well and loving person, I would feel terrible, and then I'll change immediately. So I just can't overestimate how important your words and feedback are, especially if you come across a provider that is just absolutely not doing what they're supposed to do, and you wouldn't want a loved one to come back. Write that down and make sure that it's heard. And if you choose to vote to move with your feet, so hopefully you do, the next person doesn't experience, that trauma from going to that provider. I say that I'm, understanding on the other side of that is many of us really want to do our best and time doesn't allow. There's reasons why somebody might not give the best care, but they're not necessarily homophobic or trans. But at the end of the day, you as a consumer who are coming in to get healthy, their stuff is not yours to fix. That's theirs to fix. It's yours to get the care you need and also speak out if you're not receiving the care that you need.
Okay, so I always get too carried away with these conversations. That's why I'll be like, I have to pull myself back, realize we're still working together. This is not my own personal platform. But yeah, I'll be like, this is not my own personal platform. I have to remember I'm working. So thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, of course. I'm going to open up the rest of the time for questions. If Krista wanted to, if Dr. Holloway wanted to return to join us. I wanted to make sure everyone visits www.howardbrown.org, and we're going to open the time up for questions with Brandy, with Dr. Jackson, and we had a few questions in the chat, Dr. Holliday, I saw.
Yes, one really quickly. So first of all, thank you for this amazing conversation. This has been wonderful. Tara, you are up there with Oprah, so I appreciate
I love Tara.
an amazing interviewer. And there were some Tara quotes in there that I'm trying to capture.
I literally quoted her on my phone.
But Dr. Jackson, thank you for the time and this amazing information that you've been sharing. One question that I had, and I put in the chat, is sexual orientation, gender identity concepts. Are those taught in medical school or in residency? How far has organized medicine come in really introducing these kind of concepts as we deal with patients or clients?
You know, doctor, I had to take a deep breath on that one because I can only speak now. I am what I consider still a recent grad. I finished medical school in 2015 at Northwestern. I did all my medical training in Chicago here. Shout out, you know. So I was at
Go Wildcats.
Go Wildcats. And so I did medical school there. I went to UIC for my psychiatry training. It was another 4 years. So I finished all that training in 2019. So that's the context. I was literally in school in 2019 in my training. I recall very little of this curriculum at the medical school level. So that's when you're like, first 4 years, you're rotating through a bunch of different specialties, you're hitting the books, very superficially treated. Then I moved on to my psychiatry training, right? So now I'm in the world of, we're the specialists who chose to go into human minds, which this is like what gives me chills.
That's right.
And I think I am thankful that at UIC, it was actually my colleagues, my co-residents, the residency director there is an openly gay man. So I was lucky to be trained in an environment where people were out, people were proud, and we educated each other very seriously. And honestly, some of the people I train with work with me at Howard Brown today. So the director of psychiatry is Dr. Angela Shrestha. We trained, she was ahead of me in training. So I knew who she was. She didn't necessarily know I wanted to know how that is. But I say that to say what an important gift it is that I personally was able to receive a deep education on these things. And before I got to Howard Brown, before I got out of training, we are not the norm. We are not the norm. Yeah. I go to conferences, it's just really lacking at the medical education level. Honestly, at all levels. And that may have changed. I leave room that may have changed for some organizations, institutions. That was not a dig at Northwestern by any means, because they were pioneering in a lot of areas. I hope now it's changed.
Yeah. I would just end by saying, that's a great note to end on, the hopeful note that the future of medicine and the healthcare system will be one that will be much more free of bias and racism and homophobia and transphobia and all of those things. As a former Wildcat, as a psychologist myself, I just know that things like what happened last year with the murder of George Floyd and all of the sea change that's happening in the consciousness of our country, I am hopeful that the medical training, all of the training we get in the healthcare system will begin to move in the direction of being much more open, accepting, and just understanding that we're serving human beings. So, yeah. Any parting words? We're coming up on time. Anything, Tara or Dr. Jackson, you'd like to share?
Well, I just wanted to thank you all for inviting and including Howard Brown Health today. It was my pleasure. I wanted to let every Black person, every Black man know that you have value and to prioritize your health care. And also I wanted to make sure that I leave a plug for the Institute of Anti-Racism in Medicine, Dr. Brandy Jackson's organization. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Brandy Jackson if she had any other parting words.
Well, I just really want to say I'm grateful and thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Holliday. Thank you, Tara. Thank you also to so many people, to Rashad Bell, to Dr. Rob Marvin out there, who is my residency director. I just spoke about, I didn't even say his name. I just want to say thank you for having this conversation, and to the folks who came, thank you for coming out for Black men. I know, so much love to that community and to all of us who support them. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you again for being with us today. We're going to invite everyone to now move over into the expo booth. Howard Brown has a booth and they will be there. You'll get a chance to talk again to Dr. Brown and Dr. Jackson and ask her questions directly. I gave you your name there.
She is Brown.
I receive it.
Howard Brown,
I receive it.
And then right after that 15-minute break, we are going to go into our closing session where we'll hear from our own representative, Danny Davis, to talk about a call to action around activating yourself for empowering our communities to move forward, particularly around violence and voting. So looking forward to seeing you at our closing session in about 15 minutes. Right now, please enjoy our vendor booths. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.